Should I or should I not change my job? In October of 2022, right now, it's come up quite a bit with individuals, whether from the Great Resignation or quiet quitting, who are really thinking about their jobs and their careers and should they move? Should they go after a job that can provide more money, perhaps more flexibility and remote working? But what I'd say is you kind of want to think about it from two perspectives, and it could help you for sure, but it also might provide some challenges down the road, and we'll get to that as well. So should you change your job? First, from the employee perspective, I would say there are many times where it is appropriate to change your job and gain new experiences. And in the one segment that I did about the seasons of your career, I talk about it in terms of spring, summer, fall, and winter. And during those different times of your career, spring being when you're fairly new out of high school or college and you're gaining new experiences, it's probably okay to change careers a bit more often because you're still learning some skills and trying to figure out maybe where exactly you want to align your strengths and your passions and what do you want to do for the 49-year career that I talk about in another segment as well. But it really comes down to what you want to achieve now. And to me, what are the motivators of you considering a job change? Because really, when you think about why you want to change a job, I mean, it might be because you're burnt out, right? With moving to remote work, you can't unplug. You're always on. You feel like you're getting more responsibility without more pay or salary. And again, I'm not trying to be a proponent that you stay in a job that you're not unhappy with, but understanding what's making you unhappy and what you could potentially do in your current role today might be one option. To look at the role a different way, talk to your manager. Another way might be to change roles, the other extreme. So when we talk about should we change our roles today, I would really try to think about why are you considering that? And it could be from an employee perspective that, okay, we went to remote work. My team's been cut by 20%. Now we're getting overloaded with new items that we have to go do. But if you think about kind of the long term on that, you're going to be gaining some new skills and experiences. You might have more work, but think about what you gain in terms of learning from having to scale up. I had a session around how do you scale as a manager, but it also implies as an employee. If you're comfortable with the level of effort you're doing today, and you don't add some pressure to that, i.e. maybe picking on another project or having to pick up a little extra work because the team's reduced temporarily, that provides you an opportunity to learn some valuable new skills that can help you in your next role. In the dollar cost averaging session that I did, I talk about the investments over time that add up. And I do want to stress that obviously you don't want to be taken advantage of, and you don't want to have to do two persons worth of work forever. But that's where that dialogue with your manager is important about, okay, how long is this going to go on? What can we do to make this more efficiency? Where do I have to look at cutting some work, scoping in for the amount of cycles that we do have, and prioritizing? So these are all kind of factors from an employee perspective that I try to keep in mind when either I'm feeling this way or somebody's talking to me because they're feeling maybe it's time for a new job. And so we've talked about the workload a little bit. Now let's talk about skills and experience. You might get to a point where you feel that you've mastered your area and you don't really have more to do or to grow with in this space. Well, then there's a great conversation with your manager about, especially in a megacorp or any large company or even a medium small company, you can look for opportunities. Where is there another opportunity in, say, the company where I might be able to grow more because maybe I'm not getting the stimulus that I need here? The challenge is I've mastered my area or made it as efficient as possible. So what else can we do as we free up those cycles to continue to grow? And it's a very important point to me personally, because I've felt that I've had a bit of ability to actually define my job based on where I want it to go and the skills that I want to develop, as long as it aligns with the larger mission of the team and where it's going. And I talked about, having the organizational currency. Is if you're moving the business down the organizational currency, sometimes you can set your own agenda as an employee, within the confines of what you have to get done that's assigned to you. But there's so much opportunity to increase efficiency, maybe open new revenue streams, and you're only limited by your own imagination and how far you're willing to take it. Because if you can sell that organizational currency value as an employee, well, then a lot of times your manager will help you find time to actually go work those projects, which will then obviously grow skill and then ideally your career along that as well. So, those are some reasons where I kind of say, well, maybe you can not have to change your job in order to get what you want, or at least to get the growth that you want if you're looking for a career. Now, what I would say is clearly, I'm not going to speak about the times where you try to have those conversations with your manager and you feel completely stuck and you can't come to a negotiated settlement, build that trust with your manager. Well, then obviously you might want to consider changing jobs. But now what I would say is, now that we've kind of talked about some good reasons to not change your job and ways to approach it maybe differently to still get growth that you want, let's flip it the other way and look at it from a manager perspective for the changing of jobs. So when you get into, say, the summer or fall of your career, if you're actually looking for a career, you've got to think about what does it mean to move up and take on more scope as you continue to grow. Because what I would say is that as you get more senior and you want to grow your scope and your influence, there's a level of trust that you can handle broader and broader scopes that comes into play. And there's really only one or two good ways to do that. And that is with the time in a role to show that you can go beyond the day-to-day and show longer term improvement and management at scale, whether it's as an individual contributor, that senior, or even as a manager or a leader, because most of the long-term gains that you can impact the org will not come from a short-term project, because they usually require multiple years of moving an agenda and a strategy and kind of, building this up for this bigger goal in the future. But if you don't stick around a company long enough, how would a manager in the future actually look at your resume and make that determination? Here's a case in point. I've looked at a number of resumes where I see an individual, if you get them past the early part of their career, what I call, the spring when they're just out of college, and you expect some job movements there. But at some point, if you want to hire into a job that's more senior, a manager has to have some comfort that if they invest in you, you're going to invest in the company. And so what I would say is you want to take a look at your resume and think out 5, 10, 15 years and say, what kind of projection do you want to have for your ability to manage larger in teams at scale for a longer period of time? Because I've seen resumes where an individual, after say their first, 4 or 5, 6 years, they continue to change jobs every 2 years for the next 8 to 10 years. And so now I get a resume with 15 years of work experience with no job, where they haven't stayed in a job longer than 2 years, maybe 2.5. So what's the perception of a manager who's looking to invest in somebody longer term? Now, the next session will be about your position as a job or a career, which is kind of an orthogonal concept. But if you think about it from a manager or hiring manager position, if they're looking to hire someone who's going to make a longer term impact, if you've never shown that you've stayed long enough to have a longer term impact, you might be challenged in getting a serious look at for especially a more senior position. Because again, I'm not saying that somebody's going to have a 30-year career in a single company anymore. But if you think about what it means to change a culture or to make a major change organizationally or change a business, that's usually not going to happen overnight, or maybe even not even a year or even 2. But developing a strategy and then showing that you've been able to implement a strategy over an appropriate period of time is very important in my mind when you're really kind of going after those more senior positions or even middle senior positions, because what the role expects of you you kind of have to have some credibility that you can do that job. Because remember, in an interview, unless you really know somebody, you're only going to get a few hours of discussion and then your resume, which talks to kind of your accomplishments over a period of time that you're in a company. So while there are always exceptions to the rule, and there will be people who can bounce jobs a little bit more, I can tell you that myself and some peers, when we look at resumes and we're looking at bringing in particularly more senior people, that we want to invest our time in for coaching and learning and having them learn the organizational currency, and obviously the right key people and building the relationships. It becomes important. So again, I'm not saying that I'm a proponent of people staying in a career a long period of time, particularly if they're unhappy. But what I would say is be cautious when you're deciding to make that determination of whether or not it's appropriate based on what you want to have reflected upon you in the future. And what I would say, just kind of as a counterpoint, is I've talked to some peers, very senior people that I know, and we all kind of admit there are times where you take a job and it's just a bad fit, and you don't know that before you go in, and you leave the job pretty quickly. And we all say that's going to happen. I mean, it's going to happen to everyone eventually, probably. But with that is you can't really have that happen to you over and over and then still show that performance and impact over time, and that trust that you want the management team and hiring team to put into you to learn over time and make longer term impacts, if you haven't actually shown. So I'm not saying that there's an appropriate period of time for that, but what I would say is, based on what level and type of growth you want to see for yourself at particular levels, there is going to be some expectation that you can show that level of change, which then usually takes time. So with that, just a few points about what it means to think about whether or not you should change a job, both pros and cons, and just what to keep in mind when you're thinking about it. But what I would say is, it's also important to think about what stage of your career you're in, whether spring, summer, fall, or winter, because that can have an impact on what you want your portfolio of skills, abilities, and experience that you can display to show. Now, the next segment, I'll talk a little bit about your position that you're in today as a job versus a career, and how to approach that and think about it based on what you want to get out of that particular role. So thank you for your time. And if you have any thoughts about this topic, I'd love to hear about it. I'm sure others would as well in the comments. Thank you.